Let me offer the following. We saw in this document, and we've seen, I think, in other Trump administration statements over recent months, the constant reiteration of nuclear modernization as being the top priority, which was also the Obama administration's view, and often the comments that you would hear from Obama administration officials. I remember once we had Admiral Richardson, the CNO, here, and I challenged him a little bit in a friendly way as to whether that was the right way to think about nuclear modernization, and he said absolutely it must be, because our submarines are getting old. The Ohio class need to be replaced. They're not going to be safe anymore. And what I'd like to propose to you is that we look a little more critically at the overall price tag of estimated at $1.3 trillion for the full modernization agenda. And I want to suggest we may need to prioritize. Right now, there are five, as I define them, five big categories of nuclear modernization in Trump administration plans, mostly consistent with Obama administration plans. There is the replacement of the SSBN force, the ballistic missile-armed nuclear submarines, the Ohio class becoming the Columbia class. There is the B21 bomber, the Radar, being built. And that, among all these capabilities, has dual purpose, conventional as well as nuclear. There is the desire to replace the Minuteman ICBM force. Even though it's been around for a long time already, there are some questions as to how much longer it could remain in effect. There is the nuclear command and control that Jim and others have talked about, being seen as vulnerable to cyber attack, to nuclear attack, just getting old itself. And then finally, the whole Department of Energy nuclear weapons infrastructure question. I would like to put forth a very simple conceptual point. First of all, that I'm not persuaded by the math that I see in the NPR. It claims that this entire agenda will never lead to a higher percentage of the defense budget for nuclear modernization than about 6.5%. I think that's a very low estimate. When I do the math, I come up with a number closer to 10%. And that doesn't even include Madeline's domain of the nuclear weapons activities of the Department of Energy, which are, when you add up cleanup and everything else, close to another $20 billion. So this is real money. And I think right now there's a little bit of a giddiness in Washington. The defense budget is more or less fully funded robustly across all domains. I don't think that's likely to be the case. So I think we need to start to prioritize and at least have a debate about which of these five areas of modernization are most important. To my mind, there are three that are clearly more important than the other two. That's my own analytical judgment. Others may disagree on this panel or among all of you or elsewhere in town. But I think clearly we do need to replace the nuclear-armed submarines. They're getting old. They're not going to be safe for our sailors that much longer. They're already pushing 40-year service lives, which is far and away the longest we ever operated a submarine in the United States. So I fully support, you can debate the numbers and the specific details, fully support replacing the Ohio class with the Columbia class.
Michael, if I may, they're
Please.
Also the most survivable strategic system.
So another,
and they carry the bulk of our strategic warheads.
Right, thank you. I also fully support the B21 Radar, because I see it as being so useful for conventional warfighting. It is one of our asymmetric advantages in conventional warfighting, long-range stealth bomber. You'll recall we already have a stealth bomber, but we've only got 20 of them in the B2 force. And any kind of large-scale deterrence of large-scale conventional conflict, I think is going to require substantially more long-range stealth than that. So for me, the overwhelming argument for the B21 is the dual capability of that platform. And I'm very glad to see that it's, at least at the moment, robustly being funded. Finally, nuclear command and control. And with Jim Miller here, I could have mentioned his affiliation with the Defense Science Board. A year ago, the Defense Science Board put out a report that I still lose sleep over occasionally, because it talked about how we really couldn't vouch for the cyber resilience of any of our nuclear systems. It didn't go so far as to say they're all vulnerable to being taken down tomorrow by hackers, but it said there are questions about basically all of them that we're going to need a decade to remedy. And so to the extent that we can't vouch for the integrity of our nuclear command and control, that's got to be seen as a top-tier problem. On the DOE, we've already heard a lot of questions and criticisms, or at least doubts about some of the more ambitious planning there. And finally, on the ICBM force, I think we can probably delay it the way that RAND, the way that GAO have examined, by finding a way to shrink it somewhat so that some of the existing deployed missiles become a repository of test missiles, because there's a certain number of test flights you have to do per year. If you do a combination of refurbishment of the Minuteman force and a modest downsizing, I think you can maybe buy another 5, 10, 15 years before you have to replace it. In any event, if resources get tight, I think we need to have these kinds of options in mind.